Earlier this morning, congressional Democratic leaders got on one knee for about 9 minutes for a moment of silence honoring George Floyd. Now, most of us can agree that George Floyd should not have lost his life. I think basically everybody wants to see justice. But what we're seeing from Democrats isn't just some moment of silence. It's actually a bit more worrisome than this. Over the past decade, there's been a rising fringe ideology that's becoming more and more mainstream, and it's called intersectionality. Some people have referred to this as a non-theistic religion. I've actually got a video I want to show you of people in a park raising their hands in what appears to be a sermon or worship, and they're chanting along to a speaker, much like you would see in church. Now, some might say it's simply about being anti-racist or things like that. But no, this is actually changing the shape of how our government is functioning and how our society is functioning. Right now, some of the most ardent proponents of this ideology have literally called for completely disbanding the police department in Minneapolis, a dramatic and radical transformation, which many people in this country, most people, don't want. 90+% of people don't want to see a reduction in the police force. So who are these people and how are they gaining so much power that they can dramatically transform our institutions in this way? Well, it's a spreading religion. And as our mainstream and prominent institutions literally bend the knee to this group of people, don't be surprised when companies seemingly are forced to do the same thing. Now, many people may claim they actively support this. I do not believe this is the case. We have seen Trump's secret voters, and we saw the shock of Donald Trump winning. One of the reasons is that this freaks people out. But it's not just about dismantling or defunding or abolishing the police. We are seeing our long-standing institutions fall prey to this fringe ideology, which, dare I say, unfortunately, is leaving the fringe and is now pretty mainstream, considering congressional Democratic leaders are bending the knee in much the same way many of the leaders of this ideology have proposed. There's a few specific instances I want to highlight. The Sierra Club, once a champion of the environment and to a certain degree animal rights, now saying racism is worse. We also have an organization called the Free Press, which has since advocated for overt censorship. How does that even make sense with their name? Why? Because racism is worse. And we can see it take come to a dangerous fruition with the COVID pandemic. You see, for the longest time, we were told explicitly we couldn't go out. You can't actually go to church because they're only operating at a small percentage capacity in many states. However, the New York DA has explicitly said, if you are protesting for Black Lives Matter, they will not charge you. Think about what that means. This ideology is now in our government and directing how they prosecute people who are violating executive orders. Yet other people who might want to go to church, you can't do it. We are seeing people straight up say on CNN today that the white people or people who would like to call the police if they're in trouble, well, that's coming from a place of privilege, and therefore you must give up your police department. We are talking about politicians at the highest level adhering to a fringe ideology. So I want to break this down for you and talk about exactly what they're doing. Unfortunately, when I talk to a lot of my friends, they don't know anything about what's going on. Hopefully I can show you some strange contradictions, which may make you think twice about what's really happening and why the Democrats fell to one knee today. Quite literally bending the knee. A little strange, huh? Before we get started, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's many ways you can give. There's a P.O. box if you'd like to send things. But the best thing you can do is share this video. Like I mentioned, I talked to a lot of my friends and I asked them if they know about any of these dramatic and radical changes, and they don't. And then when I talk to them about what they think is happening, to them, they think it's simply like we're going to pass a law and say, hey, you can't do this or that. Most people don't even know that right now in Minneapolis, a veto-proof majority has announced they will disband the entire police department. Please, I am not exaggerating when I say this. Minneapolis City Council President defends plan to dismantle police on CNN, expecting their help comes from privilege. Wait till I break this down for you. Or how about this video clip of a group of people raising their hands in what looks like a religious ceremony, chanting along with their leader. I grew up Catholic. This is exactly what I've seen in religious institutions. I am not a religious person, and I do not agree with this kind of group mind think. I am much more about civil libertarianism and the freedom of the individual. Now, you can agree with this or any other religion. That's not the point. The point is, most people haven't seen this coming and they don't understand it. So if you'd like to support my work and help people better understand this, please consider sharing this video, because I can't compete with the mainstream institutions, well, that are now actively supporting this in a manner of speaking. Now, if you just want to watch, then you can hit the like button, subscribe, notification bell. Hopefully that's enough and YouTube will recommend my videos. But let's read the story from the Hill. Pelosi and Schumer kneel in silence for almost 9 minutes to honor George Floyd. They say senior Democratic lawmakers, including Pelosi and Charles Schumer, knelt during a moment of silence shortly before unveiling a legislative package of police reforms Monday. About 24 lawmakers knelt for 8 minutes and 46 seconds as a tribute to George Floyd, the unarmed African-American man who died in Minneapolis. Many of you, I'm sure you know the story. Lawmakers wearing African kente cloth scarves knelt in the Capitol Visitor Center before holding a press conference to unveil their legislation in response to almost 2 weeks of nationwide protests over police brutality toward African Americans. We are here to honor George Floyd. After almost 9 minutes, Pelosi and the other lawmakers stood back up, though the speaker needed the help of an aide due to her tall stilettos. All right. You see how long it was to have that knee on his neck. Senate Democrats held a similar moment of silence last week. To every one of us, it was excruciating. It seemed an unbearably long amount of time. It felt so painful to get even an inkling of how this man and so many Black Americans have suffered for so long. Democrats' sweeping legislative package includes several proposals from members of the Congressional Black Caucus, including a ban on the use of chokeholds and establishing a national database to track police misconduct. Now, first and foremost, man, I have no problem with a moment of silence. I have no problem with, people calling for justice, and I 100% support the protests, not the riots, not the looting. I think Americans have a right to protest. I think whether we're in lockdown or otherwise, Americans have a right to protest. In New York City, the mayor, Bill de Blasio, announced people weren't allowed to protest. I spoke up strongly against this. We have a First Amendment right. He announced this in response to LGBTQ activists who had been protesting. So certainly it's not a partisan issue for me. When the anti-lockdown protesters came out, I supported them as well. And I support Black Lives Matter protests right now. However, what most people I see don't seem to understand is that there is an underlying non-theistic religion or fringe ideology that's starting to bubble up to the surface and dramatically alter our government in a very, very dangerous and negative way. The simple way to explain this is that let's look at the data. Let's look at the hard facts. COVID-19, for example. Well, we have this story from the Portland Tribune, and there are many other stories just like this. Racism is a pandemic worse than COVID-19. In fact, we recently saw a statement from 1,000 doctors, a letter signed, saying that they would not condemn Black Lives Matter, but that this shouldn't be construed as giving permission to anti-lockdown protesters. We have seen people, nurses, medical professionals, block the vehicles of protesters expressing their First Amendment right, but then come out for this side and clap. And worse still, in New York, the DA has said they will not prosecute protesters who are out for Black Lives Matter. Meanwhile, churches are operating at a limited capacity and people are facing fines for challenging this. This is an obvious and overt ideology providing inequality under the law. We can't have this. We can't have people say straight up, the pandemic is going to kill people, but you're allowed to sit in a park with your hands up, not social distancing and not wearing masks. It seems to make no sense. The contradiction is obvious on CNN, where they condemn the president over violating CDC guidelines and then praise the protests. This is because they are adhering to a fringe ideology. Now, again, most people don't know anything about this. They don't know what it means. They don't know why it's happening. All they know is they see other people doing it. They see all these companies doing it. So they stand in the park and mindlessly hold their hands up like everyone else without thinking twice. Let me show you where the contradictions start to negatively impact important leftist or liberal institutions. This is the Sierra Club, mind you, a very, very famous and long-standing environmental organization that published this story just today. Racism is killing the planet. The ideology of white supremacy leads the way toward disposable people and a disposable natural world. What? What are you talking about? There are industrialists in India and China who are not white, who are pumping out more pollution than we are. Our planet is facing serious danger over climate change, and now you are fighting white supremacy instead? This is part of the ideology that demonizes something that is fringe and doesn't really exist. White supremacists in this country, according to many metrics, notably the Anti-Defamation League, they make up only around 11,000 people. So how is it that we are diverting our attention from the environment or the freedom of speech in the press of marginalized people in exchange for some kind of nebulous and vague white supremacy? It's because, dare I say, intersectionality is moving out of the fringe. And when our congressional Democratic leaders bend that knee, symbolizing the same ideology as the people in all these other places, and so do our major institutions, including Chase Bank, well, it stands to reason. Something that we have said for a long time would remain on college campuses is now here in the real world. Now, to be fair, it was mainstream personalities at, say, like the New York Times or at Vox. Matthew Iglesias, for example, recently admitted this fringe, non-theistic religion isn't remaining on college campuses. The New York Times, a New York Times opinion editor recently resigned because they published an op-ed that some people found morally detestable or lacking moral clarity. The New York Times frequently publishes opinion from offensive people or from people they shouldn't, notably the Taliban in Afghanistan. Where were all of these woke people to complain about it? No. The reason they opposed the publishing of this at the paper of record, the Gray Lady, that's the New York Times, baby. The reason they opposed this was because it challenged their ideology. That's the problem of ideology. Now, look, when it comes to Christianity, I have my concerns and complaints over policies. I grew up fighting this stuff. But we have a separation of church and state we can lean back on that allows us to actually challenge religious practice entering government. And it's worked. However, ideology has no such boundary. And I don't even know how you would actually challenge this in government. But it's here, notably with the disbanding of police. Minneapolis City Council wants to completely disband the police. Ocasio-Cortez has called for the NYPD to be defunded. Now, some people are trying to walk this back and say defunding simply means reform. But when DeRay McKesson, a prominent Black Lives Matter activist, said, here are some reforms we can implement, he was actually attacked for it. So listen, I can tell you these people are a bit dejected, and it's hard to know which ideology will mostly come out on top. But I'm telling you this, when we see them actually announce they will vote to disband the police, well, I think we know where this is heading. Joe Biden has recently issued a statement saying he is not for this. I don't think that matters because I don't think Joe Biden can win anything. And the Democratic Party has now bent the knee to this ideology. Of course, what the Democratic leadership is proposing is reform. But they are the old guard, and the young people like Ocasio-Cortez have substantially different opinions. The city council, the younger generation, are adherents to this new ideology where they sit in a park and they chant together with their hands up. I take you now to what may be the most shocking thing I've seen. How can you call your organization Free Press when you actively support banning institutions you don't like, media institutions? Well, that doesn't make sense. The Free Press specifically the phrase literally means, regardless of your ideology, you have a right to speak. But the Free Press, a nonprofit organization, people I know who work here, have abandoned the policy of defending the right of individuals to speak and opposing censorship in favor of overt censorship. This is the danger of the ideology. Now, let me bring it to you how it manifests. This woman on CNN said to Allison Camerota of CNN asked, who am I supposed to call in the middle of the night if my house is being broken into? Instead of getting a real answer, this woman just said, you need to realize there are some people who can't do that anyway. So what does that have to do with anything? Right now, people in this country can call the police if they're in danger. In fact, I once called the police because someone tried breaking into my house in the wee hours of the morning around 3 a.m. And this happened only a year ago. So I called the police, they came, and they made sure everything was taken care of. Nobody got hurt, nobody got arrested. Everybody was safe. They came back, the guy came back. I called the police came back. Everybody was better off for it. What would have happened if this person actually got into my house and I was forced to defend myself? Because I don't know who this person is or why they're on my property. That would have been a lot worse. There are absolutely important reasons to have the police. But how does it make sense that I would give up my safety and security simply because other people don't have it? No, in fact, the appropriate response would be, how can we grant safety and security to those who don't have it? Instead, The ideology doesn't actually seek to benefit people. It seeks simply to create radical change and to spread its ideology. I don't think anything they propose actually makes sense. We see these people out in the street throwing things at cops. Why? What is that going to get them? Nothing. Because their goal is simply to spread the ideology and get more adherents. That's why they often have nonsensical policy positions. And that's why Barack Obama referred to them as people engaging in a circular firing squad. They target their own more often than not. Now, it could be that they target their own because they're trying to force the ideology onto others. But it's spreading. It's mainstream. I've seen my own family members post what may as well come from white supremacists themselves, yelling for white people to get active and do certain things. And I'm like, I don't see how it's different. I mean, obviously, they have a different view of positive and negative, but they propose the same things. Racial pretext for law. I don't think we can function that way because then we don't have equality under the law. And right now we don't. And that's where things are getting really, really scary. Take a look at this story from Mediaite. They say Alisyn Camerota spoke to Lisa Bender and asked her what she is trying to accomplish with the move to abolish the police. This comes days after Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey was booed for his opposition to abolishing the police. Now, they say in the story defunding, but Mediaite is in favor of these people. Jacob Frey said, "I am not in favor of the total abolition of the police," and they booed him and told him to leave. Camerota said, "What if in the middle of the night my home is broken into? Who do I call?" Lisa Bender replied, "Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors and myself too. And I know that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system isn't working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in a reality where calling the police may mean more harm is done." The interview continued with Bender defending the logistics of the move and taking questions about whether the city council gave President Donald Trump and other critics a political weapon with the push. And absolutely they did. CNN writes, "Is defund the police a massive political mistake?" Let me just tell you, the fact that CNN can't come out and straight up say it is a massive political mistake should show you that these people are wrapped up in whatever this ideology is. They've often said, many of these journalists, their justification for being ideological and not being objective is that sometimes the truth is more important than playing both sides. That's a good point. But the truth is not this. Defunding the police is massively unpopular, as I covered yesterday. Most people in this country want to maintain the current level of police, but they want police reforms, and I think that's fine. The muddying is happening now. If Democrats came out and supported proposals to reform the police, I'd say that I understand. You're always going to have your radical sect. But the fact that they would drop to one knee wearing a kente cloth says a whole lot more, because that is the major push towards leftist identitarianism, the idea of racial pretext in government. That's what we are seeing because Black Lives Matter is an identitarian movement. I'm not a fan of this. And now that it's entering government and influencing politics, you can expect to see really weird things happen. And it's happening across the board, not just here, but in many other issues. I'm gonna leave those for other segments because I want to keep this one focused. But we can see this manifesting in dangerous ways, and potentially it may turn out to, help Donald Trump. The way Fox News framed it, countering Mediaite, is that top Minneapolis politician ducks question on how dismantle police push would affect crime victims and cites privilege. It's only going to get worse. But the Minneapolis Police Department is straight up saying there will be no police. From Local Progress, they say, today, Minneapolis City Council members formally announced their commitment to end the MPD and create a new transformative model of public safety. Here is their statement. Decades of police reform efforts have proved the Minneapolis Police Department cannot be reformed and will never be accountable for its action. We are here today to begin the process of ending the Minneapolis Police Department and creating a new transformative model for cultivating safety in our city. We recognize that we don't have all the answers about what a police-free future looks like, but our community does. We are committing to engaging with every willing community member in the city of Minneapolis over the next year to identify what safety looks like for everyone. We'll be taking intermediate steps towards ending the MPD through the budget process and other policy and budget decisions over the coming weeks and months. I can't tell you what the future is going to look like, but I do think based on history, we can expect absolute absurdity. I talked about this briefly in my earlier segment. For those listening, you'll hear about it in a second. I believe it's called the Murray Hill riots. It was in Montreal, When police went on strike for 17 hours, the city fell into chaos. Banks were robbed, buildings were burnt to the ground. And I know a lot of people don't want to believe it, but this is what you can expect to happen. Right now, I do still think there is a distinction between those who are calling for, those who are protesting and those who are more extremist in their ideology. But to me, ultimately, all of it is a part of the exact same ideology, one that opposes liberalism, liberty, civil libertarianism, and supports authoritarianism. The idea that they can go around enforcing their ideology and that's it. Let me just make it very, very clear for you. In New York City, they will not prosecute you if you adhere to this ideology, the Black Lives Matter identitarian movement. I have no problem if you want to agree with that and you want to protest for it. That's fine. What I do have a problem with is the unequal application of the law. Rules for thee, but not for me, but more dangerously, leftist ideology straight up being granted immunity to violate the lockdowns during COVID. Now that should be shocking to you. 100,000 plus people have lost their lives. We are currently seeing data show that COVID is spiking amid these protests. Yep. We all asked it. With the protests running rampant and the thousands and thousands of people in the streets, we asked, will we now see stories talking about the spike? And yes, we are. Everywhere. Even in Florida. Florida didn't lock down. They were doing great. Now they're seeing a spike as well. California is seeing a spike following all of these massive protests. And it makes sense. Will it mean the end of the world? I don't know. But how can we live in a society where the governors of states like New York and Michigan will tell you to, and New Jersey, they'll tell you to your face, you cannot go outside, you cannot run your business, and then they will personally go out and march for an ideology. Do you realize where this goes? If this continues, if the mainstream top level national Democrats are bending their knee to this in the same protest, okay? Like, again, I don't care if you want to believe whatever you want to believe. This is a country that has the freedom of religion. What's concerning is the disproportionate application of the law. That means we will come to a point where the law is going to look, we're already here in New York. It's happening. If you don't agree, you're out. You will go to jail if you come out and protest. The scary thing here is that when we called out the bias on social media, the left screamed, but I'm a private company. There's no excuse for what's happening now. And I'm concerned it's not going to change because many people in our own government are now bending the knee for this. In Michigan, the courts have sided against the Democratic governors. But as this non-theistic religion grows, you will begin to see more and more fanatics in the street. And when you do, and the violence ensues like we saw in the past week, what's to come is even worse. You will then see police simply trump up charges against somebody because they're worried about the mob. It happened in Vancouver. An independent journalist named Dan Dix was being screeched at by these activists. He had broken no laws, but the police arrested him. He was the victim. He was the one being screeched at and yelled at as people swarmed him. He was the one who needed saving. But it's easier to arrest the victim to stop the mob. Now that's Canada. It'll happen here eventually. They said that he was disturbing the peace or some nonsense. They will make up charges. It is happening. I don't think there's a way to stop it. I really don't. The fringe ideology has been bubbling up over the past decade, and now it's to the point where it's in our government at the highest level. They say the same thing about Trump. They say that Trump wants to make America white again or whatever. I think that should be telling. Donald Trump is rather moderate. And right now, many Trump supporters are, I believe I might have the story here. No, let me. Many Trump supporters are donating to Ocasio-Cortez's primary opponent. Why would that be? It's been argued that Trump wants to use AOC's absurdity to win, to make the Democrats look crazy. So why would top Trump donors donate to AOC's opponent, Michelle Caruso Cabrera? It's because Caruso Cabrera isn't calling for dismantling police and some kind of radical ideological change. It's because Donald Trump represents a moderate, normal America, and that's why 10 million or so Obama voters voted for him. And that's why now Republicans are donating to Michelle Caruso Cabrera, a Democrat who happens to be a moderate, because there is more overlap with regular America and these Democrats than there are with what we're seeing at the national level. Unfortunately for someone like Michelle Crusoe Cabrera, she has advocated against AOC's refusal to support Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi just bent the knee. That means I don't think there's going to be a Democrat who's going to win, who's going to reject the rise of this non-theistic religion. Our worst case scenario, overt civil war of some sort, I don't know, because we've already seen all this rioting. We saw the other day a man shoot a protester in Seattle. We've seen now 15 plus dead, many, many injuries. I think one of the scenarios we're facing is just a rise of the moralistic authoritarian left adhering to an ideology that may last a few decades or a generation or so. I don't know for sure. I guess all we can hope for is that the old school liberals who are like the Jon Stewart types, who are civil libertarians, people like Bill Maher, actually. Now, Bill Maher's got Trump derangement syndrome, but still people like him. I hope that they return and gain their power, but it seems like they're losing. It's funny. There's a study called Hidden Tribes More in Common Report. They have a quiz. The quiz classifies you on a scale where you're a progressive activist, a traditional liberal, a passive liberal, politically, not aligned. You can be moderate, traditionally conservative, or super conservative, like hyper conservative, whatever. I'm a traditional liberal according to this quiz, meaning I'm just to the right of progressive activists. They would call me a conservative. That's just absolutely not true. The problem is civil libertarian liberal types, social liberals, the old school liberals, are so far to the right of where the current left is. And because we reject their ideology, that's what we are to them now. If you don't agree with their new religion, you must be a conservative. I fear what will happen if that becomes the norm. But I guess we'll see. It's happening. And the Democrats just bent the knee. I'll see you on the next segment coming up at 6 p.m. youtube.com/TimCastNews, my second channel. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you there.